Wonderland in Paris by Sana Tanvir. Today was a bad day for Fred. Things had not been going his way since morning. First, at the breakfast table, his mother scolded him. Then, at school, he had a big fight with his friends. His teachers also seemed unhappy with him. All these events were starting to make him feel upset, feeling as if nobody liked him anymore. He just wanted to run away from it all. At night, before going to sleep, he cried a lot and began to plan how he would run far away from all his friends and family. The next day, on his way to school, he saw something sparkling on the floor. He hesitantly went near it to see what it was. It was a strange piece of paper. He picked it up and found that it was an airplane ticket to Wonderland in Paris. He couldn't believe this ticket was even real, as he had never been there before, and he had never seen something as sparkly as this either. He looked at it even more closely and saw his own name on the ticket and was shocked. But the more he thought about it, this seemed like it might be the perfect answer to all his problems. So he kept planning how to escape, and finally he snuck out of his house at midnight with only his backpack. He went to the airport and looked around in search of the destination counter, but he couldn't find it. So he went to a help desk and asked for directions. The girl at the counter laughed out loud. She thought this must be a joke, as no such destination existed in the world. Fred felt embarrassed at first, but suddenly he noticed the same type of ticket in another man's hands. He followed him. At one point, the guy stopped in front of a wall, turned and pressed a button. A door appeared, and the guy stepped inside it. Fred tried to follow, but the door vanished quickly. Fred was a bit frightened now, but because he was curious, he too pressed the button. The door appeared and opened once again. Fred stepped into the room. He was surprised to see a completely new world. He went to a counter where a fairy was standing. With trembling hands, he showed her his ticket. The fairy smiled and asked a strange man with a long hat like a wizard to escort him to his plane. The wizard offered him his broomstick, and they both flew toward the airplane. Fred sat in his specified seat in the plane. The plane was full of strange creatures like hobbits, Disney princes and princesses, fairies, wizards, and witches. Aladdin was sitting right beside him. Fred was excited, as it appeared that he was finally going to Wonderland. He was sure it was going to be a magical experience. Also, the thought of being away from his family and friends filled him with a sense of new possibilities. As the plane took off, it disappeared into the clouds. After a couple hours, the plane began to slow and it landed. All the passengers got off. Fred looked here and there and was surprised to see that this was not the Paris that he had heard about. Everything was magical and seemed to be like a fantasy world. As he was feeling hungry, he went to a nearby market in search of food. But in this market, everything was strange. Vegetables, clothes, and groceries were flying on the street. He went into a coffee shop and ordered a coffee. A wizard came to his table, but he was not carrying Fred's coffee in his hands. It was above his head in the air. With his finger, he swirled the spoon in the cup and then, directing it with his fingers, he landed the cup on the table. Fred was amazed. Everything was magical in this wonderland, and he was happy that he had finally gotten to a place where he could live happily ever after. But suddenly, there was an uproar in the street. People were screaming and trying to hide. Fred went outside to see what was happening. A plume of fire passed just beside his right ear. He stood there frozen in shock. A shopkeeper suddenly pulled him towards his shop and hid him behind a counter. Fred asked the shopkeeper, "What's going on here?" The shopkeeper told him that the giants riding the dragons were the lords of the wonderland, and the fire he felt was a hot breath of a dragon. "But why are they here? What do they want?" asked Fred. "They usually come here to steal things. Also, they look for people that can become part of their army to fight against the wizards of the land of caves. They've been fighting with them for ages," the shopkeeper told Fred. As he listened, Fred found that he was no longer afraid of the lords. He thought he would volunteer to join their army, and in doing so, he would get a place to live. He climbed out from behind the counter and said loudly, "I want to join you." A wave of sudden silence descended. Everyone was shocked. Giant lords came near to him and burst out laughing at him. Next to them, Fred looked like a dwarf. However, one giant lord came to the front. He seemed to be the most senior lord among them. He analyzed Fred closely. He then turned toward his fellow lords and, with a roar like a lion, announced, "This young boy will accompany us to the palace." After hearing this, Fred felt a sense of pride. He had never been to any palace. Now he was excited to go there. Little did he know what was waiting for him there. The giant lords called their dragons and rode on their backs. They offered one of the dragons to Fred. With excitement, Fred climbed on and rode. Then they all flew towards the palace. Flying high above the sky, Fred saw fairies flying in the flower fields, witches and wizards coming back from their magic school. He saw Snow White and her dwarves playing in the jungle. Flying past the Eiffel Tower, Fred visualized many more magical things. Soon they reached their destination. The palace was on the top of a mountain, and below it ran a large river. In the palace yard, the lords on their dragons landed. They all walked toward a giant hall, where they looked through the stuff they had stolen. After dividing up the treasure, they started to head to their rooms. Then suddenly they all stopped and looked at Fred. With a mischievous smile, they asked him to clean the palace properly. After that, they would decide whether he could be part of their army. At first, Fred was shocked at this command, but he finally decided that he had no choice in the matter. He started cleaning the palace daily. He scrubbed the floors, doors, and windows. He washed their clothes, too. The lords were always teasing him. They made fun of him. They offered him less food, but more work. He began to miss his family. He thought about his mother, who scolded him when he did not eat his breakfast properly. But now the lords were starving him. He thought about his friends who always helped him whenever he needed them. But now there was no one to help him out. He asked the lords many times when he would be able to join their army and go out on an expedition, but they just shooed him away. He was getting very frustrated and sad. One day he decided to clean the basement. As he went down the steps, he saw that darkness covered the whole area and decided to go back up. But as he turned, he heard someone whispering. Slowly, he went closer to the sound. It was a boy who had been calling to him. "Who's there?" Fred asked. "Are you Fred, the new servant of this palace?" the boy asked. "Yes, I am, but who are you?" Fred asked again. "I am Jack, Prince Wizard of Land of Caves," the boy replied. "Prince Wizard? But what are you doing here? Who has locked you away?" he asked in astonishment. "These lords want my superpowers to rule our land, but these lords aren't wise enough to know how to use my powers. I need your help to get out of here," Jack told Fred. Fred said, "But how can I help you? I am also their slave." "If you will help me, I will help you to get back to your house," Jack offered. "All right, tell me what I need to do," said Fred. "They have my broomstick and wand. You have to sneak into their secret room and bring back those two things to me." That night, before he fell asleep, Fred made a plan to accomplish this task. He decided that his one goal in life was to get back home, and so he needed to get those two things into Jack's hands. In the morning, someone knocked at the window. He went over to the window and opened it. There was a fairy standing there. "Hey, who are you?" asked Fred. "I am here to help you. King Wizard has sent me to help you in getting Jack's broomstick and wand. Just follow me," the fairy said. As Fred went outside, the fairy showed him a minaret at the palace. At the top of that minaret, there was a room. The giant lords had locked those items in a chest there. Fred and the fairy sneaked into the room, opened the box, and took out the broomstick and wand. There was also a magical globe in the box. Fred was in awe of how beautiful it was. He took out that globe too. As they were coming out of the room, Fred bumped a table and knocked it over. The noise woke the giant lords up. They ran towards the room to see what was happening. They saw Fred with the wand and broomstick running for the basement. They ran after him, but Fred rushed to Jack's cell and gave him his wand and broomstick. Using his magic, Jack opened the door. The giant lords arrived in the basement. As they were about to catch Fred, in the blink of an eye, Jack rode on his broomstick and scooped up Fred onto his broomstick too. Jack then cast a spell on the giant lords, blinding them temporarily, and Jack and Fred flew away from the palace. As they were finally free, Fred felt so excited. He was happy because he was finally going to see his friends and family members. He felt a shaking at his shoulder. "Wake up, Fred. Come on, boy. You are already late for school." Fred's mom was trying to wake him up. He opened his eyes, and after realizing it was only a dream, he hugged his mom. "I will never leave you. Whatever you tell me, I will follow it," Fred said sincerely. His mom was surprised to hear this, but it made her happy to see this positive change in Fred. "Okay, hurry up. I am waiting for you in the dining room." His mother smiled at him. He climbed out of bed. He started towards the bathroom to take a shower, but he bumped something hard with his foot. He looked down to see what it was. It was the very globe that he had taken from the chest in the room in the minaret in his dream. He picked up the globe and looked closely at it. It began to glow brightly. All of a sudden, Jack's face appeared in it. He smiled and winked at Fred. At first, Fred was surprised, but then he smiled. He was back with his family and friends, but he also had a new friend in Jack. He placed the globe on his study table and got ready for school to see his friends. And boy, did he have a story to share with them. The end.